How do you love someone you were never meant to love? The thought came to Emily one warm summer evening as she watched the sun melt over the quiet Oregon town she had once called home. She had just returned from college, expecting peace and rest, but what she found instead was confusion, the kind that hides in the heart and whispers questions you're afraid to answer. Daniel, her father, stood by the porch fixing the old wind chime that had rusted over the years. His hands were steady, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a faint trace of motor oil on his arm. He looked exactly the same as he always had. Except now, to Emily, something about him felt different. When she was a child, Daniel had been her world. After her mother left without a word, he became both parents. He made breakfast, packed lunches, helped with homework, and somehow still smiled through it all. To everyone in town, he was just the quiet mechanic with kind eyes. But to Emily, he was home. Now, at 21, she realized home could make your heart ache. They spent the first few days together like old times. Morning coffee, walks to the farmer's market, dinner at the same wooden table where she had once done her school projects. Yet there was something new in the air, an unspoken tension neither wanted to name. Emily noticed things she had never noticed before. The faint silver in his hair, the way he hummed when he cooked, the gentle tone he used when he said her name. It wasn't wrong, she told herself. She was just grown up now. She was noticing things differently, but when she looked at him too long, her chest tightened, and that scared her. One evening, they sat on the porch as rain began to fall softly. Daniel handed her a blanket. "You've grown up so fast," he said with a quiet smile. "Feels like yesterday you were running around this yard with scraped knees." Emily laughed, but it came out nervous. "Guess time moves faster when you're not ready for it." He looked at her then. Not as a father, not as a man, just as someone realizing how quickly life had changed. "You'll always be my little girl," he said softly. Her heart clenched. She smiled, but her eyes betrayed her, because in that moment, she knew she didn't feel little anymore. That night, she lay awake listening to the rain tapping against the window. Every sound reminded her of him, his voice, his laugh, the way he said goodnight. She turned over, trying to shake the feeling, but her heart refused to calm down. She thought about the years he had worked late just to make sure she had what she needed, about how he never once complained about being alone, and for the first time she wondered, was he lonely now? The thought hit her harder than she expected. She wanted him to be happy. She wanted someone to see what she saw, the quiet strength, the kindness, the loyalty. But another part of her, the part she didn't want to admit existed, didn't want anyone else to see it. She buried her face in her pillow, angry at herself for even thinking that way. "Stop it, Emily," she whispered. "He's your father. You can't think like that." But her heart didn't listen. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen and saw him standing by the stove, making pancakes, her favorite. He turned with a smile. "Morning, kiddo." Something about that word kiddo stung. She wasn't a kid anymore. She was a woman, and he still looked at her like she was 12. Or did he? For a moment, she thought she caught something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Big plans for today?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just you and me, right?" He laughed, like old times. They spent the afternoon washing his old truck. Sunlight shimmered across the hood, and for a brief second, when their hands brushed over the same spot, time seemed to stop. Neither said a word, but both felt it, that strange, fleeting pulse of something unspoken. Later that evening, she found herself standing outside his room. The door was half open, the warm light spilling out. Inside, Daniel sat at his desk, looking through an old photo album. Emily saw the pictures, her as a little girl sitting on his shoulders, smiling wide. He was smiling too, lost in memory. She leaned quietly against the doorway, watching him. It should have felt ordinary, a daughter watching her father remember old times. But it didn't. It felt like watching someone she knew but didn't quite understand anymore. For a moment, she imagined walking in, sitting beside him, telling him how much he meant to her. But then she stopped herself, because she didn't know how to say it, not without it sounding wrong. Instead, she turned away and went back to her room, her chest heavy. That night, she dreamed of the same porch, the same rain, the same voice calling her name. But in her dream, he wasn't saying it as a father. He was saying it like someone who had been waiting for her. And in that dream, she didn't run. She smiled. When she woke up, her heart was racing. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden. She sat up, her hands trembling slightly. It was just a dream, she told herself. Nothing more. But when she walked into the kitchen that morning, Daniel was already there, holding that same photo album she'd seen last night. "Found this in the old drawer," he said, flipping through the pages. "You used to love looking at these," Emily forced a smile. "I remember." He pointed to a picture of her on her first day of school, missing a front tooth, holding his hand. "You were so small," he chuckled. She looked at the photo, then at him. Something inside her twisted. He was still the same man, her father, her protector. But now her feelings weren't the same. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, she couldn't stop her heart from beating faster every time he looked at her. He closed the album and looked up, meeting her eyes. "You okay, Em?" "You seem quiet lately." She hesitated, just thinking about a lot of things. He smiled kindly, unaware of the storm inside her. "You always did think too much." But his voice, calm, steady, gentle, only made her heart ache more. When he left for work that morning, she sat on the couch, staring at the rain-streaked window. The photo album still lay open on the table. She traced her fingers over the picture of them together, feeling tears sting her eyes. She whispered softly, "Why does love have to hurt like this?" At that moment, Daniel walked back into the house. He had forgotten his keys. He paused when he saw her, the tears in her eyes, the photo album open between them. Their eyes met. And for the first time, he saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Something deep, aching, and impossible. Daniel froze in the doorway, keys in hand, staring at his daughter, and realizing for the first time that something had changed between them forever. When does affection become something more? Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in since that morning. He kept telling himself it was nothing. Maybe Emily was just tired. Maybe he was reading too much into her silence. But something between them had changed. He felt it in every pause, every glance, every word that lingered longer than it should. Emily, too, was trying to act normal. She cooked, laughed, and helped around the house as if nothing had happened. But inside she was restless. Her thoughts wouldn't stop circling around him. Her father, yet somehow not the same man in her heart anymore. She hated herself for it, yet she couldn't deny the strange warmth she felt whenever he smiled at her. That week, the house felt smaller. Every corner carried memories. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of his footsteps, the way he said, "Good night, kiddo." It all felt too familiar, and too close. One evening, Daniel was fixing dinner while she cut vegetables beside him. The kitchen was filled with soft golden light, music playing faintly from an old radio. Their hands moved in quiet rhythm, almost like a dance. Then she brushed against the hot pan and winced. "Careful," Daniel said quickly, grabbing her hand. He brought it close, blowing gently on her fingers. His touch was warm, protective. But as she looked up, their eyes met. And in that brief, fragile second, the world around them disappeared. Neither spoke. The air between them changed, heavy with something unspoken. Emily's heart pounded. Daniel froze, realizing how close they were. He let go abruptly, turning away. "I'm fine," she whispered, trying to steady her voice. He nodded, forcing a smile, but his hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pan again. The silence that followed was louder than words. That night, Daniel sat alone on the porch, the stars above blurred by thought. What's happening to me? He wondered. Emily wasn't a child anymore, and he wasn't blind. But she was his daughter, the one person he swore to protect, not confuse. He leaned back, closing his eyes, ashamed for even feeling something he couldn't name. Inside her room, Emily stared at the ceiling, her chest heavy. She wished she could forget that moment. The way he had looked at her, the warmth of his hand. But she couldn't. It replayed in her mind over and over until she finally whispered to herself, "It's wrong. It's just love, that's all. Just love." The next morning, Daniel tried to act normal. He made pancakes again, joked about her being lazy, and asked about her college plans. But every word felt strained. Emily could feel the distance growing, an invisible wall neither dared to touch. Later that day, the mail arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope sat on the porch with her name written in familiar handwriting. Emily froze when she saw the sender's name, her mother. She hadn't heard from her in years, not since the day she left. Daniel saw the envelope, too. His face tightened for a second, then softened. "You can read it later," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time." Emily nodded, though her hands trembled as she took it. She placed it on her desk, staring at it for hours before finally opening it that evening. The letter began simply. "My dear Emily, you deserve to know the truth." Her mother's words spilled across the pages, gentle but heavy. She wrote about mistakes, regret, and choices made long ago. But then came the line that made Emily's heart stop. "Daniel isn't your real father. He adopted you when you were a baby. He never told you because he loved you too much to make you feel different." The room spun. Emily stared at the words, her breath catching. Not her father? It didn't make sense. He was her father, the only one she had ever known. But as she read on, the truth became undeniable. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears flooding her eyes. All the confusion, all the feelings she had tried to bury, suddenly burst free. The guilt, the longing, the fear, it all came crashing down at once. When Daniel came home that evening, she was still sitting on the floor, the letter beside her. Her face was pale, her eyes red. "What happened?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked up slowly. "You should have told me," she said quietly. He froze. "Told you what?" "That you're not my father." The words hit him like a blow. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his heart sinking. "Who told you that?" he finally whispered. "My mother," she said. Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Daniel sighed, sinking into the chair. "Because you were my daughter, Emily. From the day I held you, you were mine. I never wanted you to feel like you didn't belong." Her tears fell freely now. "But you lied to me." He looked up, eyes filled with pain. "I didn't lie, I just couldn't bear to lose you." The silence that followed was thick with everything neither of them could say. Emily wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. Because beneath the hurt, she saw the truth. Daniel had chosen her. Loved her. Raised her. But now everything felt different. That night, Emily sat by the window, watching the rain fall just like it had the first night she came home. Only now the sound felt lonelier. She thought about Daniel sitting alone downstairs, probably blaming himself for everything. She whispered softly to herself, "If he isn't my father, then what are we now?" The question scared her more than the answer. Downstairs, Daniel sat with his head in his hands. He had spent years protecting her, giving her everything he could. But the truth had undone it all. He wondered if she would ever look at him the same way again. He didn't see her standing in the hallway watching him, her heart breaking. For all the confusion and pain, one thing was still clear. She loved him. Maybe too much, maybe the wrong way, but she loved him. When he finally looked up, their eyes met across the room. Two souls tied by something neither of them had chosen, yet couldn't escape. Neither spoke. The silence said enough. Emily wanted to reach out to tell him it was okay. But her throat tightened. Instead, she turned away and went upstairs, her footsteps soft, her heart heavy. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, whispering the words she couldn't say out loud. "You're not my father, but you're still the only man I've ever loved." The next morning, Emily packed her suitcase, ready to leave. But as she reached the door, Daniel appeared, eyes red, voice breaking, and said the three words that stopped her cold. "Please don't go. Can love be wrong if it's real?" The question echoed in Emily's mind as she stood by the doorway, suitcase in hand. Her father, or the man she thought was her father, standing before her with tearful eyes. His voice trembled when he said, "Please don't go." And something inside her broke. For a moment, neither of them moved. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. Emily's heart was pounding so loudly she thought he could hear it. Daniel looked older that morning, tired, afraid, vulnerable. She'd never seen him like that before. She dropped the suitcase to the floor and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He took a deep breath, his voice low. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you didn't belong to anyone. You were just a baby when your mother left. I wanted you to have a family. I wanted you to have me." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "But you weren't just my father. You became my whole world, and now I don't even know who I am anymore." Daniel stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Emily, you're still you. Nothing's changed about that." But everything had changed. The truth had rewritten her past, her memories, and her heart. She didn't know how to see him anymore, as the father who raised her, or as the man she wasn't supposed to feel this way about. She sat down on the couch, clutching the edge of her sweater. "Do you hate me now?" she asked quietly. He looked stunned. "Hate you? Emily, you're the best thing that ever happened to me." Her voice trembled. "Even after what I said?" He frowned. "You didn't say anything wrong." But she knew he could see it. The confusion, the longing, the love she had tried so hard to hide. That evening, they sat on opposite sides of the table during dinner. The air felt heavy, filled with everything neither of them dared to speak. She picked at her food, her hands shaking. Daniel tried to act normal, asking about her plans, her college, her friends. But every word felt forced, like reading a script neither believed in. Finally, she looked up and said softly, "Do you ever think about her?" "My mother?" Daniel sighed. "Sometimes, mostly about how she left. But I stopped waiting for her a long time ago." "Why?" Emily asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I already had someone worth staying for." Her eyes filled again. He didn't mean it romantically, she knew that. But it still hit her heart like lightning. That night, she went into the backyard where the stars glimmered faintly through the clouds. The air smelled of pine and rain. She wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she could turn off her thoughts. Daniel came outside a few minutes later, standing quietly beside her. "Can't sleep either?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts. About the letter?" "About everything." They stood there in silence. Then Emily said, "You spent your whole life taking care of me, and I never asked how you felt. Were you ever lonely, Dad?" He hesitated at the word dad, his face softening. "Sometimes, but I never felt alone." "Not while you were here," her voice cracked. "I don't know how to look at you anymore." He turned toward her, his voice low but steady. "Then don't look at the past. Look at what's in front of you." She met his eyes, and for a moment, it felt like everything around them disappeared. Just two people standing in the dark, hearts caught between love and guilt. When she went back inside, she sat by her window and looked at the stars until morning. Every feeling inside her was tangled. Love, pain, fear, confusion. The truth had freed her from one lie, but trapped her in another. The next few days passed quietly. Daniel went to work early, came home late. Emily spent hours walking through town, thinking about what to do. She wanted to leave, to escape before her feelings destroyed what they had left. But each time she thought about packing again, her chest tightened. One afternoon, she walked into the garage where Daniel was fixing a car. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, you okay?" She nodded, trying to smile. "Can I help?" He hesitated, then handed her a wrench. "You remember how to do this?" She knelt beside him, their shoulders brushing. The familiar closeness returned. The smell of oil, the sound of metal, the warmth of his presence. For a while, it almost felt like before. Then she asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you hadn't adopted me?" Daniel froze, turning toward her. "Never, not for a second." You gave my life meaning, Emily. Without you, I don't think I'd have made it this far. Her throat tightened. Then why does this hurt so much? He didn't answer. Maybe there was no answer. That night, Emily found herself standing in front of his room again. The door was slightly open, light spilling out. He was sitting on the bed, holding the same letter she'd left on the table. I was going to throw it away, he said quietly when he noticed her. But I couldn't. She stepped inside. Because it's the truth. He shook his head. Because it changed everything. Emily's voice trembled. I don't know what to do with this. How to feel. Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired but gentle. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just don't hate me. I could never hate you, she said softly. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Both caught in a space that wasn't father and daughter anymore, but wasn't anything else either. She turned to leave, but he said her name so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Emily, she stopped in the doorway. I don't know how to make this right, he said, but I want you to stay, just until you're ready. Her eyes filled again. She nodded slowly. Okay, the days that followed were quiet. They avoided the hard conversations, talked about small things, groceries, neighbors, weather. But beneath the surface, something fragile was shifting. Every time she saw him smile, her heart twisted. Every time he said her name, she wanted to cry. She knew he was trying to keep distance, to protect them both. But some feelings can't be hidden forever. One evening, as the sun set, Emily walked into the living room and found him asleep on the couch. His hand rested on an open book, his face calm. She sat down quietly beside him, studying the lines on his face, the gray in his hair. The man who had been her father, her protector, her heartbreak, she whispered softly. You're the only home I've ever known. He stirred slightly, eyes half opening. Emily? She froze. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. He smiled faintly. It's okay. I was just dreaming. About what? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. About when you were little. You used to fall asleep on my shoulder after every movie. She smiled through tears. Maybe some things never change. He reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face, then stopped, his hand trembling midair. Their eyes locked. Neither moved. The silence stretched until her heartbeat filled the room. Emily stood abruptly, whispering, I can't do this, and ran upstairs, leaving Daniel sitting there staring at his hand, realizing he was losing the only person he had ever truly loved. Some love stories are never meant to be told. Emily locked herself in her room that night, her heart racing and her thoughts spinning like a storm she couldn't control. She leaned against the door, tears falling silently. Everything inside her screamed that she had to leave, to run before her heart made another mistake. But another voice, softer and sadder, whispered that leaving him would feel like tearing away a part of herself. Downstairs, Daniel sat on the couch where she had left him. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He stared at the empty hallway, remembering her face, her words, her trembling voice. He didn't know what hurt more, the thought of losing her or the truth that maybe she already felt lost. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains like a gentle reminder that life goes on, even when hearts don't want to. Emily came down slowly, eyes tired, suitcase in hand. Daniel looked up from his coffee, pretending not to notice the luggage at first. Leaving? He asked quietly. She nodded. I think I need to. He swallowed hard. For how long? I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. Maybe until I can breathe again. He didn't stop her this time. He just stood up, walked to her, and handed her a small envelope. Something for the road, she frowned. What is it? He smiled faintly. Open it when you're ready. Emily took the envelope, their fingers brushing, and for a moment, time froze again. She wanted to hug him, say something, anything, but her throat was too tight. So she just said, Goodbye, Dad. He hesitated before answering, his voice low. Goodbye, my girl. As the door closed behind her, Daniel felt the air leave the room. For years, that house had been filled with her laughter, her energy, her warmth. Now it was just walls and silence. Emily drove away with tears blurring her vision. The road ahead looked endless, but she didn't care where it led, as long as it wasn't back to the pain she couldn't name. She stopped halfway to the city at a quiet diner, sat by the window, and finally opened the envelope. Inside was a photo, the two of them from years ago, sitting on the porch, smiling. On the back, Daniel had written in his familiar handwriting, "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who never leaves you." Her eyes filled. She pressed the picture to her chest, whispering, "I'm not leaving, Dad. I'm just finding my way back." Days turned into weeks. Emily found a small apartment, started working part-time, tried to build a life. But even in the middle of the city noise, she kept hearing his voice in her head. Calm, steady, kind. Every morning when she made coffee, she remembered how he used to do the same. Every time it rained, she thought of that porch and the way they used to sit together, quietly watching the world. Back home, Daniel lived like a ghost of his old self. He went to work, came home, and stared at the photo of her on the mantel. Some nights he'd stand by her old room, still untouched, whispering to no one, "You'll always be my little girl." Then one evening, months later, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but his heart knew before his mind did. "Hey." Emily's voice came softly through the line. Daniel closed his eyes. "Hey, Em." There was a pause, the kind that carries everything words can't say. "I just wanted to hear your voice," she said. He smiled weakly. "You sound better." "I'm trying," she whispered. I miss home." He took a deep breath. "Home's still here, Emily. Always." That night, neither of them slept. They didn't say much, but the silence between their words felt peaceful for the first time in a long while. A week later, Emily decided to visit. She didn't tell him when. She wanted it to be a surprise. When she arrived, the old house looked exactly the same. The porch, the wind chime, the smell of coffee. For a moment, it felt like stepping back in time. Daniel was in the backyard, fixing the fence. When he turned and saw her, he froze. Then his face broke into a smile she hadn't seen in months. "You came back," he said. She nodded, tears already in her eyes. "I missed my best friend." He laughed softly, setting down his tools. "You didn't have to go that far just to miss me." "I did," she said honestly. "I needed to remember who we were, before everything got confusing." They sat on the porch again, just like they used to, watching the evening light fade into gold. The silence between them was different now, softer, easier. After a while, Emily said, "I think I finally understand." "Understand what?" he asked. "That love doesn't always need a name," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's just there, unspoken but real, and maybe that's enough." Daniel looked at her, his eyes wet but smiling. "You always were wiser than me." She shook her head. "You taught me everything I know." As the sky turned pink, Daniel handed her a cup of coffee. "You planning to stay long this time?" She smiled. "Long enough to make breakfast for you again." They both laughed, a sound that felt like forgiveness. Later that night, Emily walked through the old hallway, looking at the photos on the wall. Childhood pictures, birthdays, holidays, a lifetime of love that didn't need to be explained. She stopped in front of one picture, the two of them covered in paint after fixing her room years ago. She smiled and whispered, "We were always family. Nothing can change that." Daniel watched her from the doorway, his heart full of something deep and quiet, the kind of love that doesn't fade, even when it has to change. When she turned and met his eyes, they both knew they'd found peace in the only way they could, by letting go of what wasn't meant to be and holding on to what always would be. That night, before bed, Emily stood by her window, the rain falling softly outside. She thought about all they had been through, the confusion, the truth, the distance, and the return. She knew some love stories weren't written for romance. Some were written for redemption. She whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for loving me enough to let me go." Downstairs, Daniel heard her faint voice and smiled to himself, whispering back words she couldn't hear. "And thank you for coming back." The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight again. Emily made breakfast while Daniel read the paper, both pretending it was just another normal day. But both knew it wasn't. Something had healed. Something had finally settled. Still, as she looked across the table and saw him smiling, a small ache remained. A soft, eternal reminder of what they could never be, and what they would always mean to each other. Years later, as Emily prepared to move to a new city with her husband, she found the same envelope again, the one Daniel had given her. Inside it, now faded, was a second note she had never seen before. "If you ever wonder what we were, remember this. We were love, just in the wrong lifetime.